Like I said, we're trying something new, so hopefully it'll work. I don't really like the way it works when I just stream the Zoom, so I'm hoping this will work a little better. So we're going to talk a little bit about the tribes of Israel that decide to stay on the eastern side of the Jordan. If you will recall, we have spent quite a bit of time. We are right now near the end. It is, I'm going to say, with some of the details it gives us, we may still have some time chronologically, but the wandering at this point has, for the most part, ended. Okay, so they are now basically camped across on the eastern side of the Jordan, and there are some final things that are getting worked out before they cross the Jordan. At this point, Moses is still alive, but the idea here is that God has already told Moses, once you finish these final details, then you're going to go up in this mountain, you're going to look at the land, and you're going to die. So we're near the end. We have, in the last few weeks, we have finished the discussion of Balaam and the major sin that the Midianites and the Moabites cause Israel to fall into. And we have seen last time the revenge of Israel on the Midianites. They basically just wiped the Midianites out. And so now the enemies on the eastern side of the Jordan are gone. Okay, so now they are prepping to cross. And so we have a few little details that come into this. So in chapter 32, verse 1, it says, "Now the people of Reuben and the people of Gad had a very great number of livestock. Okay, and they saw that the land of Jezer in the land of Gilead, and behold, the place was a place for livestock." Okay, unlike here. So the people of Gad and the people of Reuben came and said to Moses and to Eleazar the priest and to the chiefs of the congregation. And then it names them. It's Adaroth, Dibon, Jezer, Nimrah, Heshbon, Elealeh, Sabam, Nebo, Bowen. It says, "The land that the Lord struck down before the congregation of Israel is a land for livestock, and your servants have livestock." So we don't know exactly what it means, but it's probably meaning plenty of water, a lot of grass, probably not too mountainy. It is a good place to raise a bunch of livestock. Okay. And so they say, "If we have found favor in your sight, let this land be given to your servants for a possession. Do not take us across the Jordan." Okay. So there is an issue here that we're going to get into as we go forward. Now, what happened 40 years ago as they neared the promised land?
They got to grumbling.
And they decided to do what? Not go in.
Yeah.
Okay. So
They're afraid.
there is a bit of at least, and certainly this is how Moses takes it. There is some suspicion that what they're saying is, we've already got this great land. Why don't we just stay here and we won't cross and take the land that God has given us?
So more fair to go into the land.
Okay. So that's how Moses responds. He says, "But Moses said to the people of Gad and to the people of Reuben, so shall your brothers go to war while you sit here?" So notice what Moses is saying. So what you're saying is you want to settle here and then you don't have to go fight for the land.
Yeah.
See, all your brothers helped take this land, and now you're going to abandon them and let them just go. Okay. And so then he says, "Why will you discourage the heart of the people of Israel from going over into the land that the Lord had given them?" So Moses is concerned that this will happen just as it happened 40 years earlier. That when they find out these three tribes, which, by the way, Manasseh appears to be the largest of the tribes. Okay. Well, if they're not going to go, why don't we just all stay here and take this and settle in this land? Okay.
Why go any further? This is good.
Mhm. Your fathers did this when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to see the land. For when they went up to the valley of Escol and saw the land, they discouraged the heart of the people of Israel from going into the land that the Lord had given them. So you remember this story, right? You remember what happened to all of your parents.
Wasn't good.
Okay. The Lord's anger was kindled on that day, and he swore, saying, surely none of the men who come up from Egypt from 20 years old and upward shall see the land that I swore to give Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because they've not wholly followed me. None except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, and Joshua, the son of Nun, for they have wholly followed the Lord. Now, they're the two spies that decide, no, we're going to go in.
Yeah.
Okay. So it goes on. It says, and the Lord's anger was kindled against Israel, and he made them wander in the wilderness 40 years until all that generation who had done evil in the sight of the Lord was gone.
So that was another 40 years they wandered around.
Well, that is the 40 years. Yeah.
First 40 years.
Yeah. And behold, you have risen in your father's place a brood of sinful men to increase still more the fierce anger of the Lord against Israel. For if you turn away from following him, he will again abandon them to the wilderness, and you will destroy all this people. Okay, so Moses' initial response is, are we going through this again?
Really?
Well, he's going to heaven soon.
Uh-huh.
He doesn't want another 40 years.
No.
Right.
Because he'd be stuck with them for another 40 years.
How long must I put up with you? Okay. So they come back, they come near to him, and they say, now we'll build sheepfolds here for our livestock and cities for our little ones, but we will take up arms ready to go before the people of Israel until we have brought them to their place. So here is what these 2 and actually 2.5 tribes eventually end up deciding to do. We will go ahead and build our towns. We will build fortified places for us to live. And then when we have done, then all of our males who are in the fighting age that would go over, we will not only go over the Jordan, but we'll go first. We'll lead the way. So what are they telling Moses? No, it's not the same thing as last time. It's not that we're afraid that God is not going to give us the land, or that we'll all die, or that all, it's not that. It's that we're looking at this land and we're seeing a land that is good for what we would have. And our request would be, while we'll go over and help our brothers take their tribal land, we want our tribal land to be here.
Which is smart.
We've already taken all of this land.
That's kind of like saying I want good, not best.
Well, but in all fairness,
but to them, that is best because it's best for their livestock.
In this case, while yes, I would agree, and sometimes that is the case. In this case, it is God working. Okay, it is God saying, okay, so Moses is looking at the picture, but in all fairness, it is clear that as we look at this is the way this all works. And let me go to the next map. This is the Exodus wanderings, but the next map kind of gives us a better picture. So we have the tribes here all the way down inside the Jordan, inside the land of Canaan, and then we have Manasseh, Gad, and Reuben on this side. Okay, so it ends up being what God had wanted. It wasn't that the Jordan was the boundary of what God's promised land was.
Okay.
But in a way, Moses is asking this question to test their actual motives.
Okay.
See, because understand, in this case, the motive is different. And there's a couple things we're going to see. Number one, notice they do not make any comment about going back to Egypt.
The others did.
Yeah, everybody else did.
Okay.
Yeah.
And by the way, let's make sure we understand. Whenever we look through the book of Numbers, that is the comment that always gets them severely punished.
I wish I could go back to Egypt.
We wish we could go back to how things were before. Okay. What they are saying now, and as we go forward and see how this is working, what this group is actually saying is, we have already seen the Lord work and kill all the enemies out of this land. And so why can't this be ours?
So it's always part of the promised land. Okay.
Okay. But the idea is, and the reason Moses asks is, obviously that's how this Saul thing started before. But also, the idea is, how come you get, and this is part of the idea, how come you get your land before all your brothers? See, you get your land and get to stop fighting and rest, and then all your brothers have to go in and fight a war for their land. And Manasseh and Gad and Reuben say, no, that's not what we're going to do. We'll send our military in to, and understand too, that up until, and by the way, this is after this part runs in. But at this point, each of the tribes is kind of its own government. Until Saul, they lived under a tribal system. So the tribe of Benjamin was its own group, had its own government. The tribe of Judah had its own government. And so there is some discussion. No, you have to go take this together. And so they say, yes, we agree with that. We will do that. Okay. So it goes on. Okay. So then Moses answers, okay. So, until we brought them to the place, and our little ones shall live in the fortified cities because of the inhabitants of the land. Okay. We will not return to our homes until each of the people of Israel has gained his inheritance. For we will not inherit with them on the other side of the Jordan and beyond, because our inheritance has come to us on this side of the Jordan to the east. So now you can see the difference in their mentality. It's not that they want to go back to what they had before God. It's that they believe that they have come to the place that God wanted them to have. And so in return, we will leave our families under the care of God while we go in and fight for you. Okay. Now, there are a couple things we need to make sure we understand, though. It phrases it this way as until each of the people of Israel has gained his inheritance. That is not exactly how this works. And this is not them sinning. It is later, but at this point it's not. God told them, I will not drive all the peoples out all at once. Okay. And the reason he said what he said is because then you won't be big enough to handle it, and the wild beasts will come, and because you won't have enough people to settle it properly. And so what we have happen, right, you'll take over bits and pieces as you go. Now, what we find happens in Joshua, and so I'm moving forward a bit, is this idea. They cross the Jordan, they take Jericho. They take Ai, and we'll get into that a little more. Probably the city of Bethel is connected to Ai. Then they have a couple of other places they go. They go on several campaigns knocking people out. Okay. Then the Gibeonites come and make a treaty. Then a bunch of the armies of the land come because they think, oh, well, they've joined forces with the Gibeonites, so we better go kill off the Gibeonites before they really become a big deal. And so they come after the Gibeonites. Israel comes in to help, and they slaughter a bunch of people. And it says that after they go through a certain number of campaigns and they've taken a majority of the land, but not necessarily all of it, it says, and the Lord gives them rest. Okay, so for that period of time, he stops the military campaign.
On both sides.
Right. And at that point, the men of these three tribes get to go back home. Now, we see later that each of the tribes have some area that was not necessarily taken in the initial campaign, and it is treated as if It is the tribe's responsibility to go and take the rest. Now, sometimes they do it, and sometimes they don't, which then does lead into some sin, because some of them, it becomes they don't go out, they don't finish off the groups, and then those groups become a thorn and lead them into sin. Okay? But what we're talking about here is this idea: we will go before your army until God gives the rest of the people rest. Okay? So, Moses answers them. This is verse 20. If you will do this, okay, if you will take up arms to go before the Lord for this war, and every armed man of you will pass over the Jordan before the Lord, until he has driven out his enemies from before him, and the land is subdued before the Lord, then after that you shall return and be free of obligation to the Lord and to Israel, and this land shall be your possession before the Lord. So he sets terms. So what is really happening here? He's setting a covenant. So here is the covenant between you and God, and you and the rest of Israel.
Don't break the covenant.
You go ahead and build a place for your women and children, and then all of your armed men, your entire group of the army, you will go into the land and you will help your brothers take their land. If you do that, then whenever this is all over, you can come back home. This will be your inheritance before the Lord, and it will be seen that way.
Forever.
But if you do not do so, behold, you have sinned against the Lord, and be sure your sin will find you out. Okay, then he says, build cities for your little ones and folds for your sheep, and do what you have promised. Okay, so the people of Gad and the people of Reuben said to Moses, your servants will do as the Lord commands. Our little ones, our wives, our livestock, and all our cattle shall remain there in the cities of Gilead, but your servants will pass over, every man who is armed for war, before the Lord to battle, as my Lord orders. We'll do it. We agree to the terms.
Yeah.
Okay. So then we move on in verse 28, and it says, so Moses gave command concerning them to Eleazar the priest and to Joshua the son of Nun, okay, and to the heads of their fathers' houses of the tribes of the people of Israel. And Moses said to them, if the people of Gad and the people of Reuben, everyone who is armed to battle before the Lord, will pass with you over the Jordan, and the land shall be subdued before you, then you shall give them the land of Gilead for a possession. However, if they will not pass over with you armed, they shall have possessions among you in the land of Canaan. Okay, so here's the idea. Either way, they're going to
To get land.
But
For the land they want, they have to do what they say.
and if they don't, then they're still going to have to go over and take the land that God is.
Then be stuck over there.
Yep.
Well, I was just thinking about them leaving their families and children behind. But yet, since 20 was the age that they had to go fight, the late age teenagers were almost like adults as far as being able to do the work, to take care of the chores.
They would not. It would not have been that. It would have been the idea of what if an enemy came, and so they are trusting that God is going to protect their families. Okay. Well, so let's do this. You're going to be gone for a couple months. It's pretty hard, huh?
Yeah.
To leave your family and go do. You know, I always my wife is such a huge.
Yeah.
My wife is such a huge fan of the old Little House on the Prairie, and they talk about, you know, those years that the crop fails and Charles has to go off to some place away from the land to, you know, work in a quarry or whatever to make ends meet. And you just sit there and go, you know, that amount of time away from home, away from your family, not knowing what's going on. And by the way, in this place, no phone calls.
Yeah.
you know. Now the separation between them is only 15, 20 miles, but that's a day and a half walk.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, that's a couple days walk. And so there is some element to this that is them trusting God to. Now, the other thing, well, and I was going to say that, but that's not really the case. I was going to say maybe some that were too old for the army, but there aren't any of those.
No.
No, because they're all
All the
died.
ones too old for the army died.
Died, yep. Because they're all the OG Egyptian.
So, I mean, you know, but whatever the situation is, the idea is that God has said, here is how we will handle this if you want this land on the eastern side of the Jordan.
But those ladies getting left behind were not sitting at home knitting.
No.
No,
They were taking care of those
taking care-
they were taking care of the
Taking
livestock.
care of the livestock and the kids.
The
and-
older kids were
Mhm.
capable
Yeah.
of helping with those.
But, and of course, that's the other thing that I think that sometimes we miss about this culture. We often talk about, you know, the fact that in some ways in this culture, women were seen as property and all that. That didn't mean they were useless. They were strong.
Yeah, these ladies.
I mean,
were
because
strong.
you're talking about none of
Yeah.
the things we think of as modern conveniences.
They had a whole
Just
lot of
making
them
butter.
suckers.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they made butter back then, but
Yeah.
how could you live without butter?
I made lots of butter when I was a kid.
See, that just blows my mind.
Make soap.
So,
I mean, and by the way, let's make sure we understand. We talk about, you know, how hard it is to cook meals and stuff like that. We don't even know what that is because we can go get the green beans out of a can. If you were gonna do green beans, you had to go pick them and chuck them and
But you know, back then, that's all they knew. They didn't
Yeah.
know the, like how easy it is. We got it. and stuff.
It's like Mia.
it was just-
Yeah.
All she knows is go to the cabinet. That's all she knows. You know, so they didn't know any better.
And visualize people.
and of course you're also talking about the idea of filling time.
Mhm.
So because of all, and by the way, this is always the thing that I think is so funny. What do we call it? We call them labor saving and time saving devices. They do neither.
No,
'Cause we
they take
feel-
up all your time.
Well, you fill up whatever time they do save you time.
They do.
Because guess what? If you were a woman in Italy in the 1600s, it took you 4 or 5 hours to make pasta and sauce because you had to make all the pasta, you had to make the sauce and all that. And now you can fix a meal in 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
But what happened? We filled all that time.
Was something else.
Yeah, computers and telephones and
Yeah.
Yes.
But it's also part of the discussion of and understand, I'm not saying it's part of the reason why we came into a movement of so many women wanting to work.
Well, it started during the war when they had to work.
When they had to work. But even then, you had things that came out during that time to help them manage time because they had to work. And then when they got done, well, that was a challenge.
Mhm.
And then what do? We keep giving them easier ways and easier ways to do things. Well, I want something to, and there's nothing wrong with that. And understand that the Bible never once makes the statement that women are less valuable. There is some hierarchical structure in here, but never a discussion of value. In fact, even the story of creation falls under that. Where did the woman come from?
From the man's rib.
So-
From his side.
Not from his head to rule over him, not from under his feet to,
Rule under him. Or be
From
under
under
him.
his heart.
but from his side. And by the way, we use the term rib, but it actually says side. Well, to be a companion, a helpmate. Well, so they're leaving their wives and all that to go do all of this. And so he goes on, says, what the Lord has said to your servants will do. We'll pass over armed before the Lord into the land of Canaan, and the possession of our inheritance shall remain with us beyond the Jordan. So and Moses gave to them, to the people of Gad and the people of Reuben, and to the half tribe of Manasseh, the son of Joseph. Okay. The kingdom of Sihon, king of the Amorites, and the kingdom of Og, king of Bashan, the lands and its cities with their territories, the cities of the land throughout the country. Okay. Now, understand, here's the idea. The land of Sihon and Og would have included their cities that were their crown cities. Well, they would have been fortified. They would have been heavily fortified. So there were places of safety. And by the way, they get the same discussion, although they do some building, they get the same thing that the children of Israel were promised. Because what they were promised is you will walk into the land and you will live in a house you didn't build. You'll gather grapes off a vineyard you didn't plant and olives off a tree you didn't plant. And we'll walk down roads you didn't build.
So you're going to get all the luxuries these people had.
You're going to get all the things that they have built. I'm going to give to you already ready.
That's like buying a house and not needing furniture.
Uh-huh.
That would be awesome.
And I mean, that is the idea. It'll be fully furnished and
Yep.
Fully furnished,
okay.
ready to go.
So it says, and the people of Gad built Dibon, Ataroth, Aror, Atroth, Shofan. We're not going to get into all those. Okay. Fortified cities, folds for sheep. The people of Reuben built, okay. They gave other names to the cities that they built, and the sons of Machir, the son of Manasseh, went to Gilead and captured it. So he actually went and captured another city and dispossessed the Amorites who were in it. And Moses gave Gilead to Machir, the son of Manasseh, and he settled in it. And Jair, the son of Manasseh, went and captured their villages and called them. And Noba went and captured Kenath and its villages and called it Noba after his own name. Now, one of the things we need to look at with this half tribe of Manasseh, half the tribe stayed here, half the tribe went across.
Why did they do that?
Because they wanted to.
They just
The one half of the group of Manasseh decided, we'll stay over here too.
Maybe it was just the ones that had lots of sheep.
so did they run more land? Since they
The land was given by lot. They probably had a little bit more overall, but not a huge amount more. They had more people.
more people.
They were the largest by
Okay.
population.
Okay.
And also remember that Manasseh and Ephraim, these two tribes, are actually Jacob's grandchildren. Okay. So the way it works is, so we go in and we look at, it was Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, and then goes on. And then Ephraim and Manasseh are the two sons of Joseph that are in Egypt. Okay. Now, here's the fun part of that. We are dealing with some major elements of biblical inheritance law. Okay. Technically, Reuben is the oldest child. Okay. Joseph was the oldest child of the favored wife. Now, Reuben gets himself in trouble because he sleeps with one of his dad's concubines. Okay. So since he was the oldest, he should have gotten a double portion of inheritance. That's how it worked. You would have, so if you had for example, here you had 12 kids. You would separate it into 13, and the oldest would get 2 portions and everybody else would get 1 portion. Okay. Because of Reuben's sin, the inheritance goes to the oldest son of the favored wife. Ephraim and Manasseh represent the double portion given to Joseph. Now, Levi, because he's the priest, his portion is God, so he doesn't get a portion of land, which is why there's only 12 tribes. Okay. Now, that's not completely true. In each of the tribes, there is a city for the Levites, or there are multiple cities for the Levites. So you go into Manasseh and you'll find 5 or 6 cities that are primarily Levites.
Because every tribe wanted to keep a Levite around because they were the priest, right?
Well, no, because that's how God set it up. Okay. So, but their inheritance was the Lord. So you had Levite cities and small around and areas surrounding for their livestock and cattle and right. Okay. Within each of the tribal areas. So, but what we run into is we run into all of these ideas. Now, if you'll notice on this particular one, Dan is here twice.
Mhm.
The reason Dan is here twice, as far as we can understand, is that Dan was supposed to get this land. This land ends up being the ultimate thorn in Israel's side for its entire history, because this is the small period of land that is taken over by the Philistines. Now, the Philistines are not Canaanites. They are not part of the group they were to drive out originally. The Philistines are a seafaring group, probably out of northern Africa, that take over this land. And you have Ascalon, Ashdod, and Gaza, those 3 cities. And they kicked Dan out of his ancestral land, so Dan moved up here and, oh, we'll take this land over here.
Well, aren't they still fighting over that down there?
Oh, yeah.
That's what
This
I
is
thought.
the Gaza Strip.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense.
See, I listened to CNN every now and then.
So understand, this would be the West Bank.
Okay, I've heard of that too.
Well, no, this is the West Bank because it's the West Bank of the Jordan. But understand, so there's several issues that go on here. This discussion of that, one of the big things that you will find if you really look at the most contested land, it is very interesting that you look at it. One of the major things that all of these governments have tried to get Israel to do is to give up control of the Mount of Olives.
That's kind of special.
Exactly. What happens on the Mount of Olives?
Jesus.
Sets foot on his return.
So that gives up everything.
So if they could,
Okay, okay.
watch the plot. It's not going to work, but here's the plot. If we can take control of the Mount of Olives and it's not under Israel control, then Jesus can't come back.
That's
Sure.
their theory.
That's their theory. Now, they don't know that's their theory. And let me make sure you understand.
Okay.
Okay. We are talking about, when we use this term, we are talking about spiritual realities.
Okay.
Okay. The people who say that Israel needs to give back the Gaza Strip and the West Bank and split Jerusalem in half, they are not thinking according to the godly timetable of all of this.
Okay.
Okay. But the enemy, who is the prince of the power of the air, who is their master, that is what he is thinking about.
Didn't he give the Beatitudes on the Mount of Olives?
No. Well, we don't know. It doesn't say what mountain.
Okay.
It just
thought there
says
was
on a
something
mountain.
there. Okay.
On a mountain. But the Garden of Gethsemane is at the base of the Mount of Olives, and that's where he went to pray right before the crucifixion.
Yes, okay.
Okay. And it says that he will set foot on the Mount of Olives when he returns.
Okay.
Because that's where he ascended from. They went up to the Mount of Olives and he ascended.
That's it.
And then it says he'll come back down in the same.
Same place. Yes,
So anyway, I know we jumped a rabbit,
Sorry.
but no, that's fine. So the idea here though is, and so let's continue this rabbit just for a minute. For all of human history, for whatever reason, this 25-mile long or about 100-mile long and about 30-mile wide stretch of land has been the most important land on the face of the earth. Okay. So let's make sure we understand. Let me go back to, let's see, this map. Okay. So right here is Israel. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, at the time of the children of Israel, all of that, this is a major settlement. Okay. This is a major settlement of life.
Okay.
Guess how the only way to get between the two of them was?
Go through Israel.
You can't go across here.
No, you probably don't.
Now, today, there is what they call the King's Highway that runs directly between. But I will tell you that even today, if you have a bad sandstorm, you're driving through there, you may die. Because this is high desert all the way across here. Okay. This area right here has been known to historians for thousands of years as the Fertile Crescent. See how it's okay. Now, you add in, so we go through. So guess what? This is why Israel was so wealthy under Solomon. Everybody who wanted to do trade between Africa and over here had to go through Israel. Guess what they had to do? Pay tolls and taxes and okay. But it's also the reason why this land seems to get taken over so much. Because this is the one easy way to get between the major. Okay. So then you add in after you go in and you see, so first they get here, they're unfaithful, and then you would see Egypt come in and do damage. And then you'd see the people from the land right around do damage. And then you'd see this group come and do damage, and this group come and do damage. And then finally, they got so bad that Assyria, which is right here, okay, which is this area right here on the shores of the Tigris, comes down and takes over all the northern tribes of Israel. Okay. Then, a little over 100 years later, Babylon comes up, takes out Assyria, comes up and over, comes down and takes out the southern kingdom of Israel under Nebuchadnezzar. Okay. And by the way, part of what happens here is Babylon ends up in a war with Egypt. Well, guess what? You have to pass through. So then we go through and we have the Babylonian captivity, and then a group from over here, okay, a little bit further east, takes over Babylon. Wipes all the way up, comes down all the way to here. Now they actually end up going this way as well. So they come up and end up into the Hittite Empire and over here into Asia Minor. And the way the history goes, the Persians believed that this city right here belonged to them and was under their protection. So when, and of course, some of this is legend, but when whatever happens to cause it, the war between the Greeks and the Trojans is real. There really was a Trojan war. Now, whether there was a Trojan horse and all that is all up to, okay. But when they sack Troy and they destroy Troy, it makes the Persians mad. And so the Persians come up and run two major campaigns against the Greeks. And both times they are thwarted. About 100 years comes away, and then a guy up here just north of Greece called Macedon, this guy was named Philip, he conquers Greece. Then his son, whose name was Alexander, starts heading this way. and he takes over this and this and this and all the way past the map. Okay. Then when he dies, it's split into 4. One general got this area, one general got this area, one general got this area. Okay. So then it goes under that. And then we go forward and we have, once again, all sorts of fun stuff. So now we go further this way to a group called Rome. And the Romans had a beef with a group that lived about here. But when they finally defeated them, then the general that they hated the most in the world fled over to here.
Okay.
So now the Romans have a problem with over here. And then had some issues right here because you have Julius Caesar, and then the last of the, by the way, let's make sure we understand, Greek rulers of Egypt, whose name was Cleopatra. She's a Greek ruler.
Okay.
And then it causes a huge deal. Then the whole Roman Empire begins, and then they begin to march across and take over all this again.
Those folks don't get along at all.
No. But every time, guess where they have to go through?
Israel. So how did Israel get it back?
So Israel had it back for, so if in all of this discussion, from the time of the Assyrians, okay, well, actually from the time of the Babylonians. From the time of the Babylonians, there is only about a 40-year period where Israel is actually independent. The rest of the time they are, so this is a, so during the Babylonians, this was a Babylonian colony. During the Persians, this was a Persian colony. During the Greeks, this was a Greek colony. Now the Persians send the Hebrews back. So this is part of this discussion that goes in. In 586 BC, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, sacks Jerusalem, razes it to the ground, destroys the temple, and basically finishes off the destruction of the southern kingdom of Israel. The northern kingdom had been gone for over 100 years already. They are transported, during the years preceding that, a large group is transported to Babylon. The best and brightest of Israel are all transported to Babylon. That's where you see Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Ezekiel. They're all transported to Babylon. They live in Babylon for 70 years. At the end of the 70 years, as promised by God in the
In
prophets,
Jeremiah.
mhm,
Okay.
when the Persians come, and it's very interesting. The story is in the Bible, but not completely tells everything.
Okay.
So in the book of Daniel, we have a moment where a king of Babylon named Belteshazzar. Okay. He is Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. Or grandson. And he is worthless. Okay. But he's trying to show how big and bad he is now that he's king. And he decides to call for them to go to the royal treasury, and they pull out the golden vessels that were in the temple and says, we're going to have a party and we're going to use the plates and dinnerware from the temple of God.
That's not gonna go good.
Okay. While they're sitting there having their meal, suddenly this disembodied hand appears and writes 4 words on the wall. They freak. Okay. And then they finally call an 80, 85-year-old Daniel to come interpret what these words are. Okay. The words are, and I'm going to have to look because I don't remember exactly how it's phrased.
So this hand writes it.
Yes.
Like I pictured the big hand, comes
I
out.
bet they
and
didn't have to
starts-
worry about the
Kind of
bathroom.
freaky.
So, but understand
Oh my God.
the hand of God.
Oh yeah, but still, it's scary crap.
And not the first time that he's written either.
Scary.
Wrote the 10 Commandments.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so here's what it says. So we'll just go ahead and explain how this works. Okay. So let me read how this is phrased. Okay, there it is. Okay, so Belshazzar. Belteshazzar is the Babylonian name for Daniel. It's Belshazzar. When he had tasted the wine, commanded that the vessels of gold and of silver that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem be brought, and the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought in the golden vessels which had been taken out of the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Immediately the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. So a hand shows up and scratches letters into the masonry of the wall. They're freaking out. They get every wise man in Babylon, and nobody can tell them what they mean. And finally, the queen goes, hey, there's this guy named Daniel who your father really trusted, or your grandfather really trusted. When it says father here, it just means ancestor.
Okay.
That your grandfather really trusted. Why don't you have him come? So Daniel comes in, and the words are Mene. Hold on. There it is. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. Okay. Here's what it means. Okay. Mene means God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel means you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Perez means your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Before that night is over, Babylon has been taken. Now the story from the story, it says that the watchman on the wall had fallen asleep, and the Persians get in and open the gate. And when they finally open the gate and Cyrus the Persian begins to march in, the people of Babylon are praising the fact that he's come to take them over because their king is so bad.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Cyrus, in the first year of his reign, says, and by the way, we talked about the Jeremiah discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Jeremiah specifically mentions a guy by the name of Cyrus and calls him his Messiah or anointed one to do this work of bring Israel back. In the first year of Cyrus's reign, Cyrus goes, I'm going to tell you, I've had a message from the God of heaven, and he's told me. Now, he is not a believer in the God of the Hebrews. He goes, but I believe that I'm supposed to send the Hebrew children home, and they're to rebuild the temple and rebuild their homes and rebuild Jerusalem. So they go, which leads us into Ezra and Nehemiah. Okay. But they are still Persian. They're still Persian. They're under Persian rule. The Greeks take the Persians, and then we go forward a few hundred years, and we come to a point where I mentioned the four generals of Alexander the Great take his, and you have the Seleucids and the Ptolemies are the two groups. The Seleucids are in Egypt, and the Ptolemies are in Egypt. The Seleucids are in Palestine and Syria and all that area. They come to a point where they have a guy whose name is Antiochus IV. Okay.
That's such a good name to use.
He self-proclaimed himself Antiochus Epiphanes, which means Antiochus the Glorious One. Now, it is said in history that his people that didn't like him called him Antiochus Epimanes, which meant Antiochus the Crazy One. Okay. But what happens is he goes down to Egypt to fight against that group. And a rumor comes back to Israel that he's been killed. And so the Jews revolt. He comes back, puts down the revolt, and decides in punishment that he is going to end Judaism. You'll recognize some of these statements. He sacrifices a pig at the temple
That ain't good.
and puts up an altar to Zeus inside the temple.
That ain't good.
Okay. He outlaws circumcision. outlaws the practice of Judaism, and this is a little gross and vulgar, but the idea is at the one point, he comes to the point where he says, if you sacrifice your kid, then they kill the kid, put them on a cord around mom's neck, and let it rot off.
Oh my God.
So because of the cruelty that has now come, a guy, and by the way, fun names, his name is Judah, okay, but he is known as Judah the Hammer. Judah the Hammer Maccabee is what it is. And he begins a second revolt. And this time they actually win, and they gain their independence for about 50 years.
For Israel.
For Israel.
Okay. I'm getting
They
lost.
gain Israel's independence for about 50 years until the Romans come in and take them over. Okay. Then the Romans, they go from about 30 BC to about 70 AD under Roman rule before the Romans destroy Jerusalem and they're scattered to the winds. Okay. Then when you get past that, then the next time you see any major discussion about Israel is 1949. 1948. In 1948, after the Second World War, the British, who had taken control of that area, gave that area back to the Jews. Now, if you're interested in a book talking about the prophecies of all that, I've got one that you might be interested in. But the idea is that for the first time in human history, a nation that has been wiped off of the face of the earth is suddenly back in its place and has its same language, has its same culture, has its same.
That's interesting.
Okay, in 1969, during the 6-Day War, the children of the Hebrews, the nation of Israel, took back Jerusalem from the Arabs. Okay. And then in 2017 is the first time that Jerusalem was ever by a major world power recognized again as the capital of Israel. Now, there's a lot to that, but understand that God had moved in a mighty way through this entire history. And I know we went through a pretty significant history lesson, but that is why this is such a big deal. Understand now even more so. It's the central point of 3 of the largest world religions in history.
I know too. What's the other one?
Muslim,
Christian.
Judaism.
Oh, okay. Okay. I was putting this all
So,
together.
the Temple Mount, according to the Jews, is where Abraham sacrificed Isaac.
Was gonna sacrifice.
Was going to sacrifice Isaac. For the Muslims, the Temple Mount is where Abraham was going to sacrifice Ishmael. They just switched brothers.
Didn't do that.
But their scriptures say that it was Ishmael, not Isaac, because Isaac is the Jew and
There.
Ishmael is the Arab. Okay. And then, of course, where Jesus died. Okay. So, in addition to the strategic value of the time, Israel's become the most brutal religious hotspot in history.
Yeah, and they're always killing each other. In the name of
And they'll
the
never
Lord.
get along.
And by the way, still pretty strategic, because in the 1970s and 1980s, if you don't know this, Russia has a major issue with Israel. Because in the 1970s, whenever in the late 60s and early 70s, whenever the Vietnam War and all that were, Israel controlled the Suez Canal. The only warm water port that Russia has is up here at the bottom of the Black Sea. So they would come bring ships out headed towards Vietnam and Korea, and they would come here, and Israel go, no, you can't go through, so they have to go all the way around.
So where's Vietnam from all here?
Way far this way.
Okay, I didn't know.
Mhm. way, way far.
I do get to know North
Mhm.
America.
Okay.
Yeah.
But understand that. So as we're watching all of this and we're watching back all the way back in Numbers, God is saying, look, I'm giving you this land. It's yours. It's important. And it is because it has major spiritual significance as well as military and all of that. All right, we're going to stop there. I apologize for the very long rabbit chase, but
That was interesting.
I felt that was
That
important.
was interesting.
So where you want to start?
I don't know yet because I got to look and see exactly where we were. I think we will start. I think 33.
Okay.
We will be very brief through chapter 33 because it's just a really quick recap of everywhere they stopped during the 40 years. So we won't spend a lot of time with that.
So were they in that bad place down there, where the sand blows so bad? Is that the desert they were in?
So this is the Sinai Peninsula.
Oh, so
That's
they
where
wasn't
they
in
were.
the edge over
Well,
there.
they would have been right here on the edge.
But they weren't where the
No,
dirt blew so bad.
no. Almost no one could live there at the time. All right, we will stop there.
They also call that Eastern.
Well, if you enjoying it, she will love this one. She does.
That's interesting.